Hey everyone, so this tutorial is actually going to be sort of a progression from my last two YouTube videos that I have shared. And if you're a beginner just starting out with pen and ink, I highly recommend you check those out before getting into this one, because in those I actually go much more in depth into different shading techniques, how to use mark making effectively in your drawings, and I also share very beginner friendly exercises that you should definitely practice before moving on to something more complex as shading a hand. Also, if you're interested in learning about how I would usually sketch a hand using a pencil from scratch, I really recommend checking out my video titled Top 5 Sketching Tips for Beginner Artists, because in that video I actually show you how I draw a hand completely freehand. The focus of this video today is going to be much more on taking in the visual information that we have from a reference picture and using marks carefully and developing our values according to what we see in a picture using pen and ink. So I'm going to be sharing my process in a more general way, but at the same time I'm going to be explaining how I use a reference image of a complex subject, because hands are very complex, in order to describe a sense of form and three-dimensionality and be able to describe my subject efficiently using pen and ink. Okay, so now having said all that, let's get started with the tutorial. For today's tutorial, I'm actually starting out with an outline drawing of a hand. If you'd like to download the same outline drawing of a hand in PDF form, please visit the first link in the description box below the video. That link will take you to the blog post that I wrote directly related to this video, and you can download that PDF completely for free and also find the reference photograph that I am using to work from. So when you are attempting to draw something as complex and intricate as a hand, there's nothing better that you can do than actually taking time to study your subject from different angles. Really take a moment to study the subject's form. If possible, invest time in learning about its underlying structure, which in this case is a combination of many little bones. Observe your own hand and notice all of the separate elements that make up the overall structure, which in this case is your palm and the different fingers. Compare each individual element to each other, the length of your fingers, the way that they're able to move. Notice all of the concave and the convex shapes that can be found within the hand. Notice the fleshy parts versus the bony parts. Notice its irregularities, its imperfections, and notice how your fingers aren't completely straight. Take note of the joints within the hand and try to think of the range of movement that they allow. And finally, take a moment to observe your own hand and try to pinpoint simple geometrical shapes that we can use to describe the form in the hand that we're going to be drawing. Remember that when you're attempting to draw a subject that actually transmits a sense of form and three-dimensionality, it's essential to learn to visualize our subjects as combinations of simple three-dimensional shapes, so that then we're able to place our shading appropriately. When drawing a hand, the combination of shapes that generally comes to my mind is a combination of two slightly modified trapezoids for the palm and the lower part of the thumb. And in the case of my fingers, they are going to be a combination of short stacked cylinders. In the case of our thumb, since we only have one joint in our thumb, it's going to be made up of two cylinders, and the other four fingers, since we have two separate joints in each, they are each going to be made up of three separate cylinders. So since hands are kind of complex subjects with a lot of curves and irregularities, I decided since the beginning that the shading technique that I would be using would be mostly contour hatching. So once I decided what mark making / shading technique I would be using for this pen and ink sketch, I went ahead and traced all of my initial pencil drawing using my 0.5 lead pen drawing pen. Once all of my ink lines were set and dry, I went ahead and erased all of my pencil lines using a soft eraser. At this point, I took a moment to observe my reference photograph, which I had previously desaturated in Photoshop. So I highly recommend desaturating or turning your image into grayscale if you don't have much practice discerning lights, midtones, and darks, because this is gonna make it easier for you. And I pinpointed all of these different values so that I could later traduce them or translate them into marks. Once you have pinpointed lightest areas, mid-tone areas, and darkest areas, if you'd like and you think it would make it easier for you, before even starting laying down any marks, you could take a pencil and create shapes for yourself so that you know what value goes where. This is something that I actually did in my previous tutorial, but I'm not doing it in this one because this one is for people who are a bit more advanced. My initial layer of marks or contour lines was created with my 0.3 point lead pen drawing pen, and I mostly like starting in the darkest areas that I see within the picture. And I was extremely careful while laying down these initial marks. I was constantly looking at my picture and constantly thinking of how I can create curved marks to better describe the structure of the hand. This is where all of the notes and the information you have acknowledged when you were first studying your own hand structure comes in and combines with the photographic reference of the hand that you're looking at, because the hand in the picture is at a certain angle and is at a certain perspective, of course, and has a specific light source that is influencing where we see the shadows and the lights. But remember that even though hands are different, they have in general the overall same structure. Remember those cylinders, remember those curves, remember those fleshy bits, the concave, the convex parts, the bony parts, and try to describe all of those characteristics with curved lines. Don't be afraid to shift the direction of your curves as you see fit. Just always keep in mind, it's super important to keep in mind the structure of your hand while you're creating these curves. Remember that when you're using these different pen and ink shading techniques, you're both creating marks and you're going to be using those lines to create values. Though there is a ton of space for imperfection, and you should definitely not be afraid of making mistakes because you can always work around them, try to keep in mind and do your best to know that every single mark that you're laying down is being laid down with a purpose to describe the form that you're looking at. I know that I am done with my initial phase of mark making in my drawing, when all of the darkest areas that I acknowledge in my picture are already covered up with an initial layer of marks. Not saturated enough as I'm going to make them later on, but they have already been covered with an initial layer of marks. And overall, the three-dimensionality of my hand is starting to come through all throughout with my initial curves that I've laid down. For the next phase of my pen and ink drawing, I continue adding in the mid-tone values, and of course it's normal that when you start adding in these mid-tones, the darkest values aren't dark enough anymore and you have to go back into those dark areas. And what I do to make those dark areas even darker is I start integrating cross contour lines. As I was mentioning in one of my previous technique videos, just because the term has the word cross in it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to create the second mark exactly at a 90-degree angle from the first. So as long as the two lines, in this case curves, are intersecting at some point, it'll be okay, and you'll be adding a second line on top, which means adding in or creating a darker value. But do try to keep some sort of consistency within each group of lines that you create. I continue moving back and forth between my darkest values, adding in the cross contour hatching, and my midtone values. And I'm starting to pinpoint where the very lightest areas are going to be, and I'm going to make sure that I leave those areas completely blank with no lines in the middle. Remember that what is going to make your drawing look three-dimensional and really pop out is creating a very wide range of values. You need to make sure that you have some spaces that are very, very dark, and you have some spaces that are very, very light, and you have a wide range in between them. And for the last phase of my mark making, all I am doing is fine-tuning, going back and forth, trying to notice in my picture whether there are areas that should be darker or a bit lighter, or maybe have a smoother transition between them. And I just work back and forth until I have arrived at a product that I like. Okay everyone, so that is it for today. I hope that you found that video helpful. I hope that it inspired you to go and try some pen and ink shading for yourself. And let me know in the comment section below, how has your hand drawing experience been? Have you tried drawing hands? Do you avoid them because they're too difficult? What do you find easy? What do you find hard? Do you have any interesting experiences drawing hands? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching my video and visiting my channel today. Stay tuned because I have so much more to come. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and see you next Friday.